The man woke up to a blinding light. His head throbbed, and his body felt heavy, as if he had been lying on a cold, hard surface for hours. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, but the light didn't fade. It wasn't sunlight or the glow of a lamp, it was something else, something unnatural. He sat up slowly, his muscles aching, and looked around. He was in a vast, open field, but it wasn't like any field he had ever seen. The ground beneath him shimmered with a faint, golden glow, and the air felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. In the distance, strange shapes loomed, towering structures that looked like a mix of glass and metal, glowing faintly in the eerie light. "Where am I?" he muttered, his voice sounding strange in the silence. As soon as the words left his mouth, he felt a strange sensation, like a weight pressing down on his chest. The air around him seemed to vibrate, and he heard a faint hum, like the sound of a distant engine. He tried to stand, but his legs felt weak, and he stumbled back to the ground. "What is this place?" he said aloud, his voice trembling. Again, the strange sensation washed over him, stronger this time. He felt as if something was pulling at his thoughts, forcing him to speak the truth. He shook his head, trying to clear the feeling, but it was no use. "I don't know where I am," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The moment he said it, the pressure in his chest eased, and the humming sound faded. He frowned, confused. What was happening to him? He decided to test it. "My name is," he began, but the words caught in his throat. He tried again, but it was as if an invisible force was stopping him from lying. "My name is John," he finally said, though it wasn't his real name. The moment the lie left his lips, the pressure returned, stronger than before. It felt like a hand squeezing his chest, forcing the air out of his lungs. He gasped, clutching at his throat, and the words spilled out of him involuntarily. "My name is not John," he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty field. The pressure vanished, and he collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. His heart raced as he realized the truth, he couldn't lie. Whatever this place was, it was forcing him to speak only the truth. Panic set in. He looked around, searching for a way out, but the field seemed endless. The strange structures in the distance loomed larger now, their glow intensifying. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he wasn't alone. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, tall, slender beings with smooth, featureless faces. They moved silently, their movements almost mechanical, and their eyes glowed with the same golden light as the field. The man scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The beings didn't respond. Instead, they stopped a few feet away from him, their glowing eyes fixed on his face. He felt a wave of fear wash over him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice steadier this time. One of the beings stepped forward, its head tilting slightly as if studying him. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant, echoing in his mind rather than his ears. "You are in the truth field," it said. "Here, deception is impossible. You will answer our questions, and you will speak only the truth." The man's heart sank. He didn't know what they wanted from him, but he knew he couldn't lie his way out of it. He thought of his family, his wife, his children, and wondered if he would ever see them again. "Why am I here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The being's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through him. "You are here to be tested," it said. "Humanity's fate depends on your honesty." The words sent a chill down his spine. He didn't understand what they meant, but he knew one thing: he had to find a way out. As the beings began to ask their questions, the man braced himself. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The man stood frozen, his mind racing as the alien's words echoed in his head. "Humanity's fate depends on your honesty." What did that mean? Were they judging all of humanity based on him? The weight of the responsibility felt crushing, but he had no time to process it. The beings surrounded him, their glowing eyes fixed on his face. One of them stepped forward, its voice calm but commanding. "We will begin," it said. "You will answer our questions truthfully. Do you understand?" The man nodded, though his throat felt dry. He didn't trust himself to speak. The alien tilted its head, studying him. "What is your name?" The question seemed simple enough, but the man hesitated. He didn't want to give them his real name. He didn't want them to have any power over him. But as he opened his mouth to lie, the familiar pressure returned, squeezing his chest and forcing the truth out of him. "My name is David," he said, his voice trembling. The alien nodded, as if satisfied. "David," it repeated. "Tell us, David, what is your greatest fear?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't want to answer. He didn't want to reveal something so personal to these strange beings. But the truth field wouldn't let him hide. I'm afraid of failing," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid of letting down the people I love." The words hung in the air, and David felt a pang of guilt. He had never admitted that to anyone, not even to himself. The alien didn't react. It simply moved on to the next question. "What is your deepest regret?" David's heart sank. He didn't want to answer this one either, but the truth field left him no choice. "I regret not spending enough time with my family," he said, his voice breaking. "I was always so busy with work, and now I don't know if I'll ever see them again." The aliens exchanged glances, their glowing eyes flickering as if communicating silently. David felt a surge of anger. Who were they to judge him? To force him to reveal his deepest secrets? "Why are you doing this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "What do you want from me?" The alien that had been questioning him stepped closer, its gaze piercing. "We are studying humanity," it said. "Your species is unique. You are capable of great kindness and great deception. We need to understand why." David shook his head, frustrated. "You can't judge all of humanity based on me. I'm just one person." The alien's expression didn't change. "You are a representative of your species," it said. "Your actions and your words will determine humanity's fate." David's heart raced. He didn't understand what they meant, but he knew he had to find a way to prove humanity's worth. The alien continued its questioning, each question more personal than the last. "Have you ever lied to someone you love?" "Yes," David admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "Have you ever hurt someone intentionally?" David hesitated, but the truth field forced the answer out of him. "Yes," he whispered. The questions kept coming, each one digging deeper into his past, his mistakes, his regrets. David felt exposed, as if the aliens were peeling away layers of his soul. But then, something changed. The alien asked, "What is your greatest strength?" David paused, surprised by the question. He hadn't expected them to ask anything positive. "My greatest strength," he began, thinking carefully, "is my ability to keep going, no matter how hard things get. I never give up." The alien nodded, as if considering his answer. "And what is your purpose in life?" David took a deep breath. This time, the answer came easily. "My purpose is to protect the people I love and to make the world a better place, even in small ways." The aliens seemed to react to this, their glowing eyes flickering with interest. David felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he could show them that humanity was worth saving. But then, the alien asked one final question. "If you had to choose between saving yourself or saving someone else, what would you do?" David's heart pounded. He didn't want to answer. He didn't want to face the truth. But the truth field forced it out of him. "I would save someone else," he said, his voice steady. The aliens fell silent, their glowing eyes fixed on him. David didn't know what they were thinking, but he felt a strange sense of relief. He had told the truth, even when it was hard. The alien that had been questioning him stepped back, its voice calm but final. "The experiment will continue," it said. "Prepare yourself, David. The next test will be more difficult." David's heart sank. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing: he couldn't give up. David sat on the glowing ground, his mind racing. The aliens had stopped questioning him for now, but he knew it was only a temporary reprieve. He could feel their eyes on him, watching, waiting. He thought about the questions they had asked, about his fears, his regrets, his strengths. They were trying to understand humanity, but they didn't seem to understand the complexity of human emotions. To them, everything was black and white, truth or lies, strength or weakness. But David knew that humanity was more than that. He stood up, his legs still shaky, and faced the aliens. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice firm. The aliens turned to him, their glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Explain," one of them said. David took a deep breath. "You think honesty is the only thing that matters," he said. "But humanity isn't just about telling the truth or lying. It's about emotions, about choices, about learning from our mistakes. You can't judge us based on a few questions." The aliens didn't respond, but David could tell they were listening. "You asked me about my regrets," he continued. "Yes, I have regrets. I've made mistakes. But those mistakes made me who I am. They taught me to be better, to do better. That's what humanity is about: growth, resilience, the ability to keep going even when things are hard." The aliens exchanged glances, their glowing eyes flickering as if communicating silently. David felt a surge of hope. Maybe he was getting through to them. But then, one of the aliens stepped forward. "Your words are compelling," it said. "But words are easy. Actions are what matter. We will test your resilience." Before David could respond, the ground beneath him began to shift. The glowing field dissolved, and he found himself standing in a completely different place. He was in a city, but it wasn't like any city he had ever seen. The buildings were tall and sleek, made of the same glass-like material as the alien structures. The streets were empty, and the air was eerily silent. David looked around, his heart pounding. "What is this?" he asked. The alien's voice echoed in his mind. "This is a simulation of your world," it said. "We have recreated it based on your memories. You will face a series of challenges designed to test your humanity. If you succeed, you will prove your species' worth. If you fail..." The alien didn't finish the sentence, but David understood the implication. If he failed, humanity would be judged unworthy. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "What do I have to do?" he asked. The alien's voice was calm but cold. "You will see." Before David could respond, the simulation came to life. The empty streets filled with people, holographic figures that looked and acted like real humans. They were running, screaming, panicking. David's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The city was under attack. A loud explosion shook the ground, and David instinctively ducked for cover. He looked around, trying to make sense of the chaos. The holographic people were running in all directions, their faces filled with fear. David knew he had to do something. He couldn't just stand there and watch. He ran toward a group of people who were trapped under debris, their cries for help piercing the air. He didn't think about the fact that they weren't real, he just acted. "Hold on," he shouted, grabbing a piece of rubble and pulling it aside. He worked quickly, his muscles straining as he freed the trapped people one by one. When the last person was free, David turned to see what else he could do. But the scene shifted again. He was in a different part of the city, this time surrounded by flames. The heat was intense, and the smoke made it hard to breathe. David coughed, covering his mouth with his sleeve as he looked for a way out. He heard a child's cry and turned to see a small boy standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by fire. Without hesitation, David ran toward him. "It's okay," he shouted, scooping the boy into his arms. "I've got you." He carried the boy to safety, shielding him from the flames with his own body. When they reached a clear area, David set the boy down and knelt beside him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle. The boy shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. David smiled, though his heart was heavy. He knew this was just a simulation, but it felt so real. The scene shifted again, and David found himself back in the glowing field, surrounded by the aliens. The alien that had been speaking to him stepped forward. "You have shown compassion and courage," it said. "But the test is not over." David nodded, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. "I'm ready," he said. The alien's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through him. "Prove it." David stood in the glowing field, his body aching from the challenges he had just faced. The aliens surrounded him, their glowing eyes fixed on his face. He could feel their scrutiny, their judgment, but he refused to back down. "What's next?" he asked, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. The alien that had been speaking to him stepped forward. "You have shown compassion and courage," it said. "But there is one more test." David braced himself, unsure of what to expect. The alien raised its hand, and the glowing field dissolved once again. This time, David found himself standing in a familiar place, his own home. He looked around, his heart pounding. The living room was exactly as he remembered it, the worn-out couch, the family photos on the wall, the faint smell of coffee in the air. But something was wrong. The room was empty, and the silence was unnerving. David called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Hello? Is anyone here?" There was no response. David's heart raced as he moved through the house, searching for his family. He checked the kitchen, the bedrooms, even the backyard, but there was no sign of them. "Where are they?" he demanded, turning to the aliens. The alien's voice echoed in his mind. "This is a hologram of your world," it said. "We have recreated it based on your memories. But we have also shown you the truth of what is happening now." Before David could respond, the scene shifted. He was still in his house, but now it was filled with chaos. The windows were shattered, and the furniture was overturned. The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of distant explosions echoed through the walls. David's heart sank as he realized what was happening. His city was under attack. He ran through the house, calling out for his family. "Sarah! Emily! Where are you?" He found them in the basement, huddled together in the corner. His wife, Sarah, was holding their daughter, Emily, tightly in her arms. Both of them looked terrified. "David!" Sarah cried when she saw him. "Thank God you're here." David rushed to them, his heart aching at the sight of their fear. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice trembling. "We don't know," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "There was an explosion, and then, everything just fell apart. We don't know what to do." David held them close, his mind racing. He didn't know how to protect them, but he knew he had to try. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice firm. "We'll find somewhere safe." But before they could move, the scene shifted again. David was back in the glowing field, surrounded by the aliens. "No," he shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "Let me go back. I need to help them." The alien that had been speaking to him stepped forward. "You cannot help them," it said. "This is the reality of your world. Chaos, destruction, fear. This is what humanity has created." David shook his head, his heart breaking. No, he said. This isn't humanity. This is something else. Humanity is more than this. We're capable of love, of kindness, of hope. You've seen that in me. The alien's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through him. You are one individual, it said. Your actions do not represent your entire species. David felt a surge of anger. Then let me prove it, he shouted. Let me show you what humanity is really capable of. The aliens exchanged glances, their glowing eyes flickering as if communicating silently. Finally, the alien that had been speaking to him nodded. Very well, it said. We will give you one final chance. But know this, if you fail, humanity will be judged unworthy. David took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He didn't know what the final test would be, but he knew one thing, he couldn't give up. David stood in the glowing field, his mind racing. The aliens had given him one final chance to prove humanity's worth, but he knew he couldn't rely on their mercy. He had to find a way out, for himself, for his family, for all of humanity. As the aliens prepared for the final test, David studied his surroundings. The glowing field, the alien structures, the strange technology, it all seemed perfect, but he knew nothing was flawless. There had to be a weakness, a way to break free. He remembered the truth field and how it had forced him to speak the truth. It was a powerful tool, but it was also a vulnerability. If he could find a way to manipulate it, he might be able to turn the tables on the aliens. The alien that had been speaking to him stepped forward. The final test will begin now, it said. You will face a challenge that will test your humanity to its limits. If you succeed, you will prove your species' worth. If you fail. The alien didn't finish the sentence, but David understood the implication. What's the challenge? He asked, his voice steady. The alien's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through him. You will see. Before David could respond, the scene shifted. He found himself standing in a dark, empty room. The walls were made of the same glass-like material as the alien structures, and the air was cold and still. David looked around, trying to make sense of his surroundings. There were no doors, no windows, no obvious way out. What am I supposed to do? He asked, his voice echoing in the emptiness. The alien's voice echoed in his mind. You must find a way out, it said. But know this, the room is designed to test your honesty, your courage, and your ingenuity. If you lie, if you give up, you will fail. David nodded, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't rely on brute strength or luck. He had to think, to outsmart the aliens at their own game. He began to explore the room, running his hands along the walls, searching for any hidden mechanisms or weaknesses. The glass-like material was smooth and cold, but as he pressed against it, he noticed something strange. It seemed to vibrate slightly, as if responding to his touch. David frowned, intrigued. He pressed harder, and the vibration intensified. He realized that the walls were not solid, they were made of some kind of energy field, held together by the aliens' technology. If he could disrupt that energy, he might be able to break free. He thought back to the truth field and how it had forced him to speak the truth. It was a form of energy manipulation, just like the walls of the room. If he could find a way to manipulate that energy, he might be able to create an opening. David closed his eyes, focusing on the vibrations. He remembered the pressure he had felt in the truth field, the way it had forced the truth out of him. He concentrated on that feeling, trying to replicate it in his mind. As he focused, he began to feel a strange sensation, a tingling in his fingertips, a warmth spreading through his body. He opened his eyes and saw that the walls of the room were beginning to shimmer, the energy field flickering like a dying light. David smiled, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. He was onto something. He pressed his hands against the wall, focusing all his energy on disrupting the field. The vibrations grew stronger, and the walls began to crack, tiny fractures spreading like spiderwebs. But then, the alien's voice echoed in his mind. "What are you doing?" it demanded, its voice filled with alarm. David didn't respond. He kept his focus on the wall, pushing harder, pouring all his strength into breaking free. The cracks grew larger, and the energy field began to falter. David could feel the room shaking, the air growing warmer. "Stop!" the alien shouted, its voice filled with panic. But David didn't stop. He couldn't stop. With one final push, the wall shattered, the energy field collapsing in a burst of light. David stumbled forward, his body trembling with exhaustion. He was free. David stumbled out of the shattered room, his body trembling with exhaustion but his spirit unbroken. The glowing field stretched out before him, the alien structures looming in the distance. The aliens were gathered nearby, their glowing eyes fixed on him with a mix of surprise and alarm. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew he couldn't stop now. He had to confront them, to show them that humanity was more than they believed. The alien that had been speaking to him stepped forward, its voice filled with anger. "You were not supposed to escape," it said. "You were supposed to fail." David shook his head, his eyes blazing with determination. "You underestimated me," he said. "You underestimated humanity." The alien's glowing eyes narrowed. "You are one individual," it said. "Your actions do not change the truth about your species." David took a step forward, his voice firm. "You're wrong," he said. "Humanity is more than just honesty or deception. We're capable of love, of courage, of resilience. You've seen that in me. And if you give us a chance, you'll see it in others too." The aliens exchanged glances, their glowing eyes flickering as if communicating silently. David could feel the tension in the air, the weight of their judgment. But he didn't back down. "You asked me to prove humanity's worth," he said. "And I have. I've shown you compassion, courage, and ingenuity. But you're so focused on your own superiority that you can't see the truth." The alien's voice was cold. "The truth is that your species is flawed," it said. "You are capable of great kindness, but also great destruction. We cannot risk allowing you to continue." David's heart sank, but he refused to give up. "You're making the same mistake we do," he said. "You're judging an entire species based on the actions of a few. But humanity is more than that. We're capable of change, of growth, of redemption. Give us a chance, and we'll prove it." The aliens fell silent, their glowing eyes fixed on him. David could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he stood tall, his gaze steady. Finally, the alien that had been speaking to him nodded. "Very well," it said. "We will give you one final chance. But know this, if you fail, humanity will be judged unworthy." David took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He didn't know what the final challenge would be, but he knew one thing: he couldn't give up. David stood in the glowing field, his heart pounding as the aliens prepared for the final challenge. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew he couldn't afford to fail. The alien that had been speaking to him stepped forward, its glowing eyes fixed on his face. "The final challenge will test your humanity in its purest form," it said. "You must confront the truth, not just about yourself, but about us." David frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" The alien didn't respond. Instead, it raised its hand, and the glowing field dissolved once again. This time, David found himself standing in a vast, empty space. The ground beneath him was dark and smooth, like polished glass, and the air was cold and still. In the distance, he could see a faint light, pulsing like a heartbeat. He began to walk toward the light, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he got closer, he realized that the light was coming from a massive structure, a towering spire made of the same glass-like material as the alien structures. The spire was surrounded by a ring of smaller structures, each one glowing with a faint, golden light. David could feel a strange energy emanating from the spire, a power that seemed to vibrate through the air. He approached the spire cautiously, his heart racing. He didn't know what he was supposed to do, but he knew he had to find out. As he reached the base of the spire, the alien's voice echoed in his mind. "This is the heart of our civilization," it said. "It is the source of our power, our technology, our existence." David looked up at the spire, his eyes wide with awe. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. The alien's voice was calm but cold. "Because you must understand the truth," it said. "We are not as powerful as we seem. Our civilization is dying." David's heart sank. He hadn't expected this. "What do you mean?" he asked. The alien's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through him. "Our species is facing extinction," it said. "We have exhausted our resources, our technology, our hope. We created the truth field to study other species, to find a way to save ourselves. But we have failed." David felt a surge of sympathy. He hadn't realized the aliens were struggling too. "Why didn't you just ask for help?" he asked. The alien's voice was filled with bitterness. "We believed we were superior," it said. "We believed we could solve our problems on our own. But we were wrong." David nodded, his mind racing. He understood now why the aliens had been so harsh, so judgmental. They were desperate, clinging to the last remnants of their power. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "Humanity can help you. We're not perfect, but we're capable of compassion, of cooperation. Let us help you." The alien's glowing eyes flickered, as if considering his words. "You would help us?" it asked. David nodded, his voice firm. "Yes," he said. "But only if you stop judging us. Only if you give us a chance." The aliens fell silent, their glowing eyes fixed on him. David could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he stood tall, his gaze steady. Finally, the alien that had been speaking to him nodded. "Very well," it said. "We will give you a chance. But know this, if you fail, both our species will perish." David took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He didn't know what the final challenge would be, but he knew one thing: he couldn't give up. David stood at the base of the alien spire, his heart pounding as the final challenge began. The aliens had given him a chance to prove humanity's worth, but the stakes were higher than ever. If he failed, both humanity and the aliens would perish. The alien's voice echoed in his mind. "The final challenge is simple," it said. "You must restore the spire's energy. But know this, the spire responds only to truth, to honesty, to the purest form of humanity." David nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know how to restore the spire's energy, but he knew he had to try. He placed his hands on the spire, feeling the cold, smooth surface beneath his fingertips. The spire seemed to hum faintly, as if responding to his touch. David closed his eyes, focusing on the truth, not just about himself, but about humanity. He thought about his family, his friends, the people he had met throughout his life. He thought about their struggles, their triumphs, their capacity for love and kindness. "We're not perfect," he said aloud, his voice steady. "We make mistakes. We hurt each other. But we're also capable of great things. We're capable of love, of courage, of hope. We're capable of change." As he spoke, the spire began to glow brighter, the energy field around it intensifying. David could feel the power flowing through him, a warmth spreading through his body. He continued, pouring his heart into his words. "We're not just one thing, we're everything. We're the good and the bad, the light and the dark. And that's what makes us human." The spire's glow grew brighter and brighter, until it was almost blinding. David could feel the energy surging, the power of the spire restoring itself. The aliens watched in awe, their glowing eyes wide with amazement. They had never seen anything like this before. Finally, the spire's energy stabilized, the glow settling into a steady, golden light. David stepped back, his body trembling with exhaustion but his spirit unbroken. The alien that had been speaking to him stepped forward, its voice filled with awe. "You have done it," it said. "You have restored the spire's energy." David nodded, his voice firm. "I did it because I believe in humanity," he said. "And I believe in you. We can help each other. We can save each other." The aliens exchanged glances, their glowing eyes flickering as if communicating silently. Finally, the alien that had been speaking to him nodded. "We accept your offer," it said. "We will work together to save both our species." David smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. He had done it. He had proven humanity's worth. David stood in the glowing field, surrounded by the aliens. The spire's energy was restored, and the aliens had agreed to work with humanity to save both species. But David knew the journey wasn't over. There was still much to be done, many challenges to face. The alien that had been speaking to him stepped forward, its voice calm but filled with respect. "You have shown us the truth about humanity," it said. "And you have shown us the truth about ourselves. We are grateful." David nodded, his voice steady. "We're all in this together," he said. "We can't do it alone. But if we work together, we can overcome anything." The alien's glowing eyes seemed to soften. "You have taught us a valuable lesson," it said. "The truth is not just about facts. It's about understanding, about empathy, about the courage to face the unknown." David smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. He had come so far, faced so many challenges, but he had never given up. As the aliens began to prepare for the journey ahead, David thought about his family, his friends, the people he had left behind. He knew he would see them again, and he knew they would be proud of what he had accomplished. But more than that, he knew he had made a difference. He had shown the aliens the truth about humanity, and he had shown humanity the truth about itself. The final message was clear: truth is not just about honesty. It's about love, about courage, about the resilience to keep going no matter how hard things get. And as David stood in the glowing field, surrounded by the aliens, he knew one thing for certain: humanity's future was bright.